Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. There is translation available. Any issue? Testing? Testing? Is it okay? Does the translation get through? Most recently, the events unfolding in Armenia quite naturally have found broad coverage in the international media, and that's only natural because you, as well as the Armenian media, have the possibility of freely and in an unencumbered way to perform your functions, work here. We have invited you today to submit to you the current situation and the measures taken within the four corners of the law by the authorities to stabilize the situation, the steps that are aiming at discharging the tension to avoid undesirable developments. Of course, in this situation, when emotions are running high, it is very important for every word, every communication, every piece of coverage to be well balanced, well thought, and the media has a responsible job to do here. In this respect, I would like to reflect on yesterday's statement by the European Union. You may be aware that within the last 2 days we have been meeting with our international partners. Yesterday and the day before we have met here in the Foreign Ministry with the heads of diplomatic missions, holding discussions with them around the same scope of issues. And during that meeting yesterday, I reflected on the statement made by the EU, saying that we fully share the provisions contained therein, not only in the sense that Armenia fully respects the right to the freedom of assembly, but also in practice assures its adequate enjoyment and enforcement. And in accordance with its international commitments, Armenia shall carry on with the same approach. In their turn, the participants of the rallies, in enjoying their right to hold free rallies, should also come up with due respect towards the Armenian legislation, and that's what I also communicated to the ambassadors yesterday. Why am I reiterating this point? Because in the media domain, I don't think intentionally, but there was a communication about this mistranslated and with some distortions. Various media outlets presented the title and the substance of this EU statement to the effect that the EU is making a call to immediately release everyone who was arrested. If you look at the English as well as the Armenian translation that the EU office in Yerevan have disseminated, there is a completely different language used there. It says, all those who have been arrested in a procedure stipulated by law during enjoying their fundamental right should be immediately released. In various replications thereof, they omitted the modifier that to this effect that exercising or enjoying their right in a procedure stipulated by law. I don't think this was intentional an omission, but it was an important part which was omitted by many. One should pay attention to this, and this is exactly what I meant when I said one should treat responsibly every word, every communication, especially when it's international structures and organizations and our foreign colleagues making those statements to avoid any undesirable pouring oil over the flames. I would also like to mention that these most recent events have been impeding and disrupting the functions and performance of many public agencies, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A number of events have simply had to be deferred because it was difficult to hold them when the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has intermittently been blocked. Access and exit have been blocked, in fact. We have received multiple complaints also by accredited diplomatic missions and embassies who have expressed their displeasure with the fact that their right to free movement have been impaired. I'm not talking even about our citizens, I'm talking about foreign diplomatic missions staff. I would also like to reflect on the following. The same or even worse has happened to the Armenian diplomatic missions abroad. Of course, our compatriots, citizens of Armenia residing abroad, do have the full right to express their opinion about the recent developments in Armenia and the situation in Armenia. That's only natural. But nevertheless, storming diplomatic missions, impeding with their natural functioning, getting our diplomats who put them in awkward situations and post these episodes online. I do not believe that this is in compliance with international law or the Vienna Convention, and this is not even the expression of democratic behavior, not to mention patriotism. Things like this have happened, and people should be responsible for this. This most recent developments, how can you discharge the tension? The only way is to do it through goodwill, through dialogue, but no dialogue or the expression of goodwill could succeed unless it's reciprocated. It should be a two-way street. In this case, you know that the authorities of the country, the president, the prime minister, the spiritual leaders, the political forces, as well as our international partners and organizations, have made multiple calls for dialogue. To this date, this dialogue has been in fact turned down, which became ever more salient at yesterday's meeting between the Prime Minister and Nikol Pashinyan, and you were witness there too. This is the situation, and I believe that we specifically invited representatives of international news agencies in order to attempt and present firsthand our approaches, and I'm also glad that today we were joined by the Minister of Justice, Mr. David Harutyunyan, who may shed light on the legal aspects of the steps that within the four corners of the law have been taken and implemented by the authorities. Thank you. I do not want to talk too long. We will answer the questions, but before the Q&A, I would like to ask the Minister of Justice to say a few words. Thank you. I will try to briefly submit to you the legal assessment of the situation. The Republic of Armenia maintains and recognizes the right to peaceful, free, unarmed assembly and rallies, and will follow up on this right. But I have also to mention that as in any other country, such rallies and assemblies are regulated by law, and there are certain procedures put in place to have them held lawfully. These processes have not been maintained within the recent days, notwithstanding that even the unlawful rallies that have taken place without notifying the authorities, that is still possible, and the people can still enjoy that right, and the police assists and assures safety of those rallies, although this does not mean that failure to maintain the requirements of the law does not result in a liability. That is, the rally goes ahead, but it still results in a liability if it's unlawful. At the same time, I shall have to mention that there are cases when even a peaceful rally may be terminated by the police. These are the cases when the rally disproportionately infringes or restricts others' constitutional rights or the public interest. Yesterday, the police has taken exactly such a decision. After taking this decision, the rally should be terminated, and any call to disobey the decision of the police results under the Armenian law in penal liability. This is the domestic legislation that we have. Quite naturally, there may be a question: what does this proportional restriction of others' constitutional rights or public interest mean? Well, such an approach exists in almost every other country. For example, if a rally or a march is held, quite naturally road traffic may be disrupted, transportation flows, pedestrian traffic may be disrupted. This is the secondary effect of the rally, and these disruptions cannot be deemed to be disproportional restrictions. But if the objective, the primary objective of the rally is to disrupt or paralyze traffic, this is already disproportional restriction of other rights. I could come up with other similar examples when a peaceful rally may disproportionately restrict others' rights. For example, noise in nighttime. However peaceful a rally may be, disproportional noise during nighttime, which may take place around residential quarters, may also be viewed as a disproportional restriction of others' constitutional rights. I am glad that yesterday at the platform of the rally there were calls made, among others, addressing the calling to make and hold rallies peacefully and unarmed in such a way as not to restrict other constitutional rights. I'll answer questions after this. Please, you were the first. No mic, no translation. You mentioned that yesterday the ambassadors have expressed their discontent about the restrictions on their stuff. I did not say yesterday. I said we have received complaints from the embassies. That is the fact. Yesterday during that meeting, did you make an attempt to extrapolate this situation over their countries? How would they have responded in their countries had there been such rallies organized there? You know what? Apart from those two rallies that I referred to, apart from those two meetings with the Corps Diplomatique that I referred to, I've also had over these 2 days individual meetings with a number of ambassadors. And you know, my background includes working as a diplomat in a number of countries, and I am aware of what's the approach in those countries towards holding free rallies within the four corners of the law, and what is the response by the authorities and the law enforcement in those countries. And I can assure you, and I'm saying this in live broadcast, that during these individual meetings with ambassadors, as well as in those two collective meetings with the Corps Diplomatique, a number of ambassadors, responding to what I was presenting, came up with their assessment, saying that it was more than restrained and proportional, the approach that was adopted by the law enforcement here. I do not want to draw parallels with other countries. Maybe their assessment was also partially explained by their knowledge of how the response takes place in their own countries. And this assessment was unambiguous. Several ambassadors referred to that in the presence of everyone, and no other ambassador objected or said the opposite. So I do not want to draw comparisons, but since you asked the question, let me tell you that within the last 10 days there were about 40 statements, 38 to be precise, statements made by the police. In all of those 38 statements, the police acknowledges that the law of the Republic of Armenia on the freedom of assembly is being violated. Several provisions thereof, and makes a call to refrain or to cease any action that disrupt stability and the public order and impede with and fail to respect others' rights. Apart from the participants, they exist other citizens, and their rights also have to be respected. For example, restricting the movement of everyone else not taking part in the assembly, I do not think this would be tolerated or permissible in any other country. I do not believe any other country would have permitted storming school buildings and in the presence of the students use offensive and foul language against the teachers. You know what that means? How are these teachers subsequently are going to instruct their students? Making calls to the children to join the rallies. Of course, our law does not have an age cap on the involvement, but there are approaches in tune with the International Conventions on Children's Rights, among others. This list could be continued. Like I mentioned, there's about 4 dozen statements published by the police where there is clear identification of the violations and infringements of the public order, as well as encroachments on private and public property and assets, including state-owned assets, which have taken place over these recent days. I almost drew the comparison you asked for, but I do not want to call any names of countries. It would not be appropriate. Please. We will get to you. Thank you, now Nessa Hakan, Radio Liberty. Mr. Harutyunyan, may we consider at this point lawful the fact that after the arrest of Nikol Pashinyan, his family is still not aware of where he is being kept? And Mr. E.Nalbandian, in the same vein, is it possible that you may be criticized by your international colleagues that a member of the parliament has been arrested and no one is aware as to his whereabouts at this point? Thank you. To the best of my knowledge, the location is known, the advocate has been involved, and that's at least what the law enforcement has communicated to me. The response that has already taken place, I shared it with you by the EU, which was distorted in the press, not by the EU mission or Brussels. I do not claim that parts of it can be communicated or not interpreted. Interpretations could be different, but at least the text should be there verbatim. And when the text is quoted verbatim, you can already judge from it. It is talking about those who have exercised their right for the freedom of assembly according to the law. And if possible, picking up where I left, Mr. Ministers, you mentioned that the negotiations de facto failed, initiated by Prime Minister Sargsyan. As of today, has there been any discussion with the Prime Minister Sargsyan as to what would be the next steps of the authorities to get out of this crisis? Thank you. Let me tell you that, notwithstanding the fact that you also witnessed yourself yesterday's meeting, which, of course, comparisons are not a good thing to do, but yesterday I told to the ambassadors, what is the country where you can summon a president or a prime minister, come over here and I'll meet you, telling me this is stipulating the time and format for the meeting, imposing it upon the prime minister or the president. I don't think there is another country where that would have happened. But you saw that the president of the republic visited the Republic Square, the site of the rally, to meet Mr. Pashinyan, who insisted that this be done in plain sight, in public view. You know the reasons. During which an agreement was reached that, yes, of course, one has to respond to the calls not only by the Prime Minister, but, like I mentioned, by the political parties, by our spiritual leaders, as well as by international structures, to revert to a dialogue. And it was mentioned, no, I will not go for this meeting. If he wants, okay, let him come to Marriott. He should come at this particular hour, okay, he should come in the presence of the media, okay, that was also accepted. Do you understand that any meeting, negotiation, or dialogue in the presence of the media is far-fetched? You can then disseminate, you don't need to have a meeting in the presence of the media, you can just have a simply disseminate the communique. You can invite the media in the beginning and at the end of the meeting, as it goes usually, as the practice is. Maybe it would have been more appropriate, more useful, and more efficient to have a true meeting and negotiations, a serious talk. But that was turned down. It was turned down through a simple ultimatum. The offer for a dialogue was turned down. You're asking what's next? Well, you heard the new message of the President of the Republic, as well as the message that Mr. Babloyan, the Speaker of the Parliament, have made in the wake of that meeting, and they're still reiterating the idea of dialogue. In response to that, the international structures once again reiterate the need for a dialogue. Of course, the only way is through a dialogue and negotiations, trying to find solutions through this, but that should be reciprocal, based on reciprocal goodwill and wish to do so. Please.
Can you hear me? My name is
Robin Forrest, Al Jazeera Անգլերեն կայանից։ Դուք ասեցիք, որ պարոն Փաշինյանի տեղը հայտնի է, կարող եք ասել որտեղ է գտնվում, մյուս առաջնորդներն էլ էս անդիմության, ուրիշ պատգամավորները որտեղ են գտնվում։ Եվ երկրորդ հարցը, որ հանգամանքներում են նրանք մեղադրական ստանալու, եթե ունեն դիվանագիտական անձեռնմխելիություն որպես խորհրդարանի անդամներ։ Դիվանագիտական չի, սովորական անձեռնմխելիություն։ Frankly speaking, I'm not aware of the precise location. I only asked the law enforcement whether his next of kin, the family, have been notified and has there been a lawyer assured access thereto. The response by the law enforcement was that a lawyer has been accessing him in the capacity of an advocate, and all the necessary measures are taken. I think the law enforcement, who does not report to the Minister of Justice, are in a better position to answer. As for the diplomatic immunity, a member of the parliament enjoys not diplomatic but parliamentary immunity, and this is what it means. You cannot deprive him of liberty, with the exception of the case when the person is caught at the scene of the crime or immediately thereafter. Like I mentioned, yesterday the police has taken the decision to terminate the rally, about which the organizers of the rally have been duly informed. Any call after that notice to disobey the police or not to terminate the rally, as of that moment when the police is taking a decision to terminate it, are deemed to be a crime under Armenian law. And in the communication disseminated by the prosecutor's office, there is reference to exactly this being the ground for their arrest. struggles. Rehan Dimitri BBC-ից ես կուզեի այս հարցին նույնպես հետևելով հարց տալ։ Դուք ասացիք, որ տեղյակ չեք նրա պահմանվարի մասին։ Ինչի պարոն Փաշինյանի պահելով վայրը գաղտնի պահում հասարակությունից, անշուշտ սա մի դեմք է, որով հետաքրքրված են շատերը, աշխարհը նրա մասին արդեն շատ է լսել, քանի որ նա առաջնորդում այս բողոքները։ Ես կուզեի նաև երկու նախարարներին հարց տայի հետևյալը։ Պարզաբանեիք, երեք երբ որ վարչապետը այդ կարճ հանդիպմանը մասնակցեց պարոն Փաշինյանի հետ, նա հղում արեց 2008 թվականի դեպքերին, որը հնչեց որպես սպառնալիք։ Արդյոք սա նշանակում է, որ կառավարությունը նախատեսում է ուժ գործադրել, ինչպես դա արել է 8 թվականին։ Եվս մի հարց, հիմնական պահանջը, որը մենք լսում էինք վերջին 10 օրերի ընթացքում, բողոքողների կողմից վարչապետի հրաժարականն է։ Մենք գիտենք, որ նա դա չի նախատեսում, նա հստակ դա երեք ասեց, բայց արդյոք ինքը ծրագրում է անդրադառնալ այս բողոքողներին։ Սրանք 3-10 հոգի չեն, տասնյակ հազարավոր հայեր են, որոնք բողոքում են հրապարակում ամեն օր։ Շնորհակալություն։ Very well. It is not a secret. I just mentioned that at this point I'm not aware of the location because there are certain investigative actions being performed as we speak. He is being kept in a location designated for arrested persons. At this moment I'm not aware of the location, but you can ask that question to the prosecutor's office. The next question about reference in the Prime Minister's intervention to the events of 2008 March 1. I think it was still interpreted and presented in distortion. He was referring to the lessons learned from it. He was saying that we, the authorities, have also drawn our lessons from the misfortune of 2008 March 1, and it is exactly those lessons that we have learned that make us look for a political peaceful resolution of this situation. The question was addressed to Mr. Pashinyan. Mr. Pashinyan, did you draw those lessons yourself? Was the question. I reiterate, we're talking about the fact that the authorities have learned their lessons, and this cannot be in any way interpreted as a threat, let's put it this way, or an allusion to using force. That's it. Yes, and you asked the question whether the Prime Minister is intending to convey a message to the public or whatever. I think that this situation clearly demonstrates that a significant part of our citizens have discontent accumulated, and quite natural this issue has to find a political resolution, and I think inevitably we shall find the ways and medium to maintain contact, to maintain dialogue with the public, hopefully also with the organizers of this political movement of protest. We are all now thinking about the ways that could yield the best result in this dialogue, but it is unquestionable that it has to be on the political plane. Other questions?
How do you envisage?
Ինչպես եք դուք նախատեսում հանգուցալուծումը այս ճգնաժամի Հայաստանում, եթե համարում եք, որ խոսությունը հնարավոր է, իսկ բողոքողները միայն հրաժարական պահանջում, ինչքանով է կարևոր, որպեսզի Հայաստանը մնա այս վարչապետի ղեկավարությամբ բողոքողների հետ երկխոսություն փնտրելիս. You know what, in Armenia, the reforms that have been implemented, the constitutional reforms and the parliamentary elections that followed in their wake have all been done in close cooperation with respective international partners and structures. Suffice it to mention the European Union, the OSCE, the Council of Europe, the Venice Commission, and so forth. As a result, this process has been assessed in general terms quite positively. That's common knowledge. I believe you are also aware of that. As a result, and in the continuation thereof, Armenia embarked on transition towards the parliamentary system of governance. Let me remind you that 1 year ago, during the parliamentary elections last year, there were people running for MP seats that are now opposing certain things. They run for the parliament seats, they became members of the parliament, and have for a certain time been working in the parliament as part of this new ideology of transition, transferring the governance system of the country onto a parliamentary one. At a certain point in time, and you're aware that even this faction has proposed its nomination for the president. It didn't materialize because it did not get any support even in the process of nomination. So they were taking part in all of the processes in this framework, and all of a sudden they came out against a certain result of the process, now claiming that everything has to be revised and changed. But the main message is that so these reforms that have been implemented in Armenia have received quite a positive assessment. I'm not only talking about the constitutional reforms, I'm not only talking about the most recent elections held, but also the path that Armenia has gone through towards strengthening democracy, towards strengthening democratic institutions, enhanced respect for human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, rallies, of which is the result of what we're seeing. We're sitting here in the foreign ministry for years on end. I'm meeting the media, and we invite everyone indiscriminately. We've never turned down any media. Any media outlet can freely operate, come here, ask their questions. This is also an accomplishment, isn't it? These are the accomplishments that the authorities of Armenia have referred to many times, and we keep saying that these are irreversible accomplishments. And of course Armenia shall continue along the same path. Of course there's discontent for a number of reasons. It's not only the fact that in particular these MPs are proposing certain things, and the authorities realize that in the sense that there are accomplishments, there are successes, there's omissions, and there are drawbacks, and there's a lot more yet left to do, not only in developing the economy, not only in social protection, but in many other areas as well, and even in the reforms themselves, in strengthening the democracy and some other aspects. Of course, it's a long and winding, arduous path. No country ever would have anyone claiming that they have reached the perfection and there is nothing left to improve, reform, or make better, whether it's the electoral system, whether it's the freedoms. You know better than me. If you're citizens of other countries, you know respectively that all countries are all going through that. And there is the same applies to here. We also have certain discontent, and these issues have to be resolved through mutual understanding rather than reverting to street decision making, which may shake the foundation of the state, may impair or jeopardize, like they say, impair the external security of this country. We have drawn lessons from our history, and we know that every time when the internal stability, the internal situation goes through certain developments, there is always someone out there ready to leap at the opportunity. Not exactly enemies of this nation, but those who do not wish good to the Armenians. And it's not incidental that there's been communications within recent years that at the line of contact with Karabakh there is accumulation of Azeri troops. And there's been responses that you may see in another neighboring country that have been voiced. Is this the response that this nation would have liked to witness? The country's stability, the country's safety is one of the preeminent factors and foundations on which you can build economic development and based on which you can address and resolve the issues that have led to that discontent. We have gone a long way in building the reputation, the rating of this country. Today, Armenia is perceived by the international community as a reliable partner. Solidarity therewith has been expressed by a big number of international structures. Let me recall Francophonie once again, a country who has just exceeded such serious organization as Francophonie for only 5 years, with 84 members, associate members and observers. This huge international structure, which represents more than 1/3 of the countries of the world, has entrusted Armenia with holding the summit and to head the organization for 2 years. And there are many other examples that could be quoted. There are numerous examples in the meaning that, yes, we have succeeded to become an active member of the Eurasian community, at the same time being, as they say, or maintaining very close cooperation and partnership with the EU. We have succeeded to sign the framework agreement, SEPA, last November. And at the Munich Security Conference, Armenia was quoted as an example by both parties as a best example that perhaps maybe not today, but in the near future others could follow. Because Armenia, being a small country, notwithstanding all the difficulties, succeeded truly to develop relations with all those who are ready and willing to develop these relations. And we're truly and genuinely an open country, and we mean it. I came up with only 2 examples, but there are numerous such examples that we have highlighted during the press conferences held here at the ministry. And let's take the regulation of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Let's look at where we are now. We have reached a state when for years on end our approach is almost identical with that of the 3 Minsk co-chairs of the OSCE. The 3 co-chairs have a mandate for mediation in resolving the Nagorno-Karabakh. And it's various countries, it's Russia, United States and France. This is very rare when the US and Russia have the same opinion on the resolution of the conflict. They're not proposing anything general. This is very serious, well thought principles, provisions in a comprehensive project. And Armenia says, yes, we're ready and willing to go for a solution based thereof. And are these events going to help us in this? Of course, we failed to arrive at a resolution. Why? Because Azerbaijan turns it down. It doesn't turn down Armenia's or Karabakh position, it turns down the position of the international community. Today our position, and I think you understand it better than we do, because we have submitted it, supported with facts, our position is not only in unison, but is fully perceived and understood by the 3 co-chair countries which represent the international community as a whole. So in this context, this permutations, this creation of instability contains certain dangers also in this respect. Let me also mention that we are on April 23 now, today. We receive signals from abroad, from our compatriots, that there are certain people who would like to use, or rather abuse, April 24, which is the day of the commemoration of the victims of the Armenian genocide, to abuse it for other purposes, for their ends. This is not only unethical, because the Armenian nation, whether in Armenia or in the diaspora, has always been consolidated in the commemoration of the innocent holy victims of the genocide, rather than manipulate or abuse it for their political overtones. Thank you. One from that side, then it will be your turn again. Thank you. Mr. Ministers, although you mentioned that the dialogue at this point is deemed to be possible by you, but one of the parties claims that they only have one demand, the resignation of Prime Minister Saksan. Do you think it is at all possible for the Prime Minister to resign at all? Thank you. Let's look at it. Although the question is simple, I think it is asking for a more in-depth answer. I do not believe that the acceptable answer would be no in no case, or the opposite, and if everything is possible in theory. I believe when you say, is it at all possible, this means that we all have to very well realize what is it that we're talking about, what are the challenges that this country is facing, because yes, public calls that are very emotional are understandable, but the similar emotional calls have been voiced in 1988 when we were decommissioning the nuclear power plant without having an idea what the consequences would be. In order to answer this question, we have to leave the emotional plane, enter the plane of reason, discuss the country's development vision, its security agenda, and only once we soberly, unemotionally discuss those issues, we will be able to answer your question. Without sober judgment on the emotional plane, this answer cannot be anything other than what I just said. Please. Շատ շնորհակալություն ձեր դիտարկումներին հետևելով։ Ելնելով նրանից ինչ որ մենք էինք լսում վերջին մի քանի օրերի ընթացքում բողոքավորների կողմից, այս տարօրինակ իշխանության փոխանակումը տեղի ունեցավ խոր սահմանադրության փոփոխությունից հետո երևի վարչապետը այնքան էլ ուղղակի չէր արտահայտվում, երբ սահմանադրությունը փոխվեց, ինքը ասաց, որ մտադրություն չունի վարչապետի պաշտոնը գրավելու։ Ինչպես մենք հասկացանք, հենց դրանից են շատ մարդիկ այժմ վրդովված, այսինքն որ ազնվություն չէր դրսևորվել։ Վերադառնալով պարոն նախարար Հարությունյան ձեր ասացին, երկխոսությունը, այսինքն բոլորը կառավարությունում հիմա մտածում են նրա մասին, թե ինչպես գտնել երկխոսության ձևը։ Եթե բոլոր առաջնորդները այս բողոքավոր շարժման հիմա գտնվում են կամ ձերբակալման կամ կալանավորման կամ հնարավոր մեղադրականի առջև, ում հետ եք այդ երկխոսությունը պահպանելու լուծում գտնելու համար այս ճգնաժամի։ Շնորհակալություն։ I believe that first and foremost we have to talk with the public, with the society, which is why I said that the situation is far more complicated and the solutions are not that simple. We're still looking for the ways and modalities that would best allow for moving to a proper political dialogue. Simple, public, open discussions, well, I was referring to a dialogue as early as before President Sargsyan going to the square and meeting Mr. E.Nalbandian. Even before that, I said that no real dialogue is possible in the public domain. The dialogue happens in camera, behind closed doors. This allows to filter out the emotional component and move on to the plane of reason and realistic discussion. With whom, I think at this point we have still to use every possibility and opportunity. I'm glad that our opposition MP colleague Mr. Marukyan has taken the decision to return to Armenia. I think his call about the third way was a very reasonable one, and I lament that there were responses in the emotional plane to this call. This is a search for a way as to how we could unknot or detangle this difficult situation. Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much.
I would be glad to invite you over again whenever the need for that arises. Thank you.